Hello everyone, welcome to today's Emory's career webinar. Our title today is If It's Not From Within, It's Without. My name is Lane Conville-Canny. I'm the Senior Associate Director of Academic Learning at Emory University. I'm thrilled to be joined with Jesse Hartman, the co-owner and director of Hartman Tutoring, an academic mentorship company located in his hometown of Manhattan. For over 15 years, Jesse has worked with students and employees, acting as a guide, advisor, and instructor to nearly 2,000 students and families. At the same time, Jesse embarked upon a career as an award-winning hip-hop artist, performing extensively in the 2010s and releasing critically acclaimed albums that most people have not heard of. We're so excited that you were able to join us, and we just wanted to remind you today's presentation will be recorded, so if for any reason you have to step away from your computer or have something come up, we're going to send this full recorded presentation to you right after we're over, so you can play it back at your convenience. With that, I will turn it over to Jesse. Thanks for being here, Jesse.
Thanks for having me. I'm just adjusting my headphones right now, so I'm just going to try and make this work so I can hear you guys. Lane, would you mind just talking a little bit more, because I wasn't hearing you in my headphones?
Okay, does that sound good?
So Lane, if you could just talk a little more, I just want to make sure I can hear you.
Can you hear this okay?
I'm just trying to get you in my headphones because I can't hear anything in my headphones right now.
Okay, I hear you A-okay.
All right, let's see if I can do it. So Lane, can you just test it one more time?
Yep, I hear you okay. Can you hear me?
No.
Okay, we hear you, so I think you can go ahead and proceed.
All right. So you can hear me for sure?
Yes.
Okay, but I'm picking you up on my. Now we're okay?
You are coming in and out. Are you connected?
I think now I'm in the headphones.
Okay.
So this should be good.
I think you're good. I will jump back on if we have any problems hearing you.
All right, fun times. And if you're going to turn yourself off, you're going to be on mute so the echo thing goes away, right? Okay.
Yes, I'm on mute.
Awesome. All right. Fun start. Tech stuff. Good. So, hello. I'm Jesse, and thanks for being a part of this. I appreciate you guys registering to watch the talk, to being here right now and listening and being interested in this entire idea of balancing a career with a passion project. So there's a few different things we're going to talk about today. Mostly, you're going to learn a lot about me and some of the approaches I took to balancing what became a career. I really didn't mean to become a business owner or even a tutor, but that's what ended up happening, along with a side life / passion project, which was being a rapper, which I definitely did mean to do. That was kind of my intention for most of my life, actually. So today we're going to learn how to kind of make both of those things happen, how to balance these two different ideas using executive functioning as the foundation that we're going to build a lot of these skills and concepts on. Executive functioning, there's a lot of different ways to describe it. We'll kind of get into what the details of executive functioning are as we go. But for the most part, there's just one component that I want everybody to be aware of at the outset, which is that we're not really going to be going through tips and tricks. I'm not trying to give you shortcuts or life hacks or anything like that. We're really going to be discussing mindset and approach and outlook and a lot of different ways to really view from a different perspective what it means for you to be able to do things that you're probably already pretty good at, you just haven't really fully maximized yet. So if you're thinking about getting shortcuts or tricks or tips, towards the end, we'll talk about some very practical, applicable ideas that can be put into use. But the majority of what I've really been able to use over the last 20 years or so to help me has been adjustments of mindsets and perspectives and outlooks. So this entire idea of if it's not from within, it's without really obviously stems from the notion that change really does come from it being about what's inside of you and who you are, not necessarily so much about what you do and how you do it. So passion projects are awesome, and they're pretty important. I think that a lot of times people get very fixated on their careers and their lives, and the word hobby has kind of become somewhat trivialized, but passion is still something I think that we can take pretty seriously. So the idea of balancing a career with a passion project is something that I think requires quite a bit of heart and deserves quite a bit of respect. So it's awesome that you guys who are watching this have an interest in these things, that you have passion projects. I imagine that your passion projects are probably podcasts or websites or something like that. Maybe you're aspiring rappers as well. But we're going to get into kind of how I was able to balance my burgeoning career as a tutoring company owner along with being a rapper. So it begins with me rapping. This is me in 2011, being a rapper, like actually in New York City, rapping a lot, making albums, doing shows, going on tours. And this was kind of an odd thing for me to do somewhat, considering that my life didn't have much to do with the rap world as an educator. In 2011, I was tutoring a bit here and there, but really I was devoting myself to being a rapper, to interacting with audiences, to selling music and distributing different forms of performances, going on to festivals and stages and all that stuff. And so the idea for me was really to start releasing albums. So these were all the albums I started dropping. There was an album called One Day, an album called Barnes and Noble. And these albums, in the beginning weren't really all that necessarily well received. A lot of people didn't really know who I was. But as I kind of started to move forward a little bit, the word started to spread about this guy who was a tutor, who was an educator, who was also rapping and making a bit of a buzz in New York City in the underground scene, which is what I was doing. So simultaneously, yeah, I was running this little company that at the time was called the Alice Hartman Tutoring Company. This is our first logo. This was a logo that I made on Microsoft Word when I had no idea what I was doing. And at this point in time, I was my world was really just about tutoring students, but the company was starting to take shape. And I was using a lot of my own beliefs actually as an independent musician and my understanding of how I was running my life as an artist to make the tutoring company kind of become a company as well. We had maybe like 2 employees. I think both of them were stealing from us at the time, which wasn't awesome. And it was up to me to really try and make the company take off as an entity and kind of use a lot of my own ideas without having a background in business to make this thing actually work. So it certainly wasn't easy, and I didn't really know what I was doing. I was learning a lot as I went, which is an important concept. So this was our first ad. Nothing special about this, not super exciting. So it really goes back to me being a kid who was passionate about hip hop. And when I was thinking about educating, I really always thought of myself as being just as interested in helping kids as I was in being a part of the hip hop community. So every time that I was interacting with a student, I was always kind of picturing myself breakdancing as a child. Every time that I was talking to a parent about our company, I was picturing myself rapping as a baby. And anytime I talked about my interest in helping not just the students that we work with, but also help other educators and to bring on employees and to grow a staff, I was picturing myself kind of always going back to being a rapper. And the person who can communicate as a rapper isn't that different from the person who can communicate as an educator as well. So this is all just me always being a rapper, always being interested in communicating in a very lyrical and very honest way that somehow did translate to me being both a tutor and a business owner as I got older. So yeah, I rapped a bunch before anybody even really heard it. And then people started hearing it, and it was pretty exciting. The word started to spread, and my shows got a little bit more popular, and I ended up really becoming like an actual quote unquote rapper, which I didn't necessarily expect to be able to happen, but I was really actually pretty inspired by the success of my rap career, and that helped fuel my confidence for the tutoring company as well as I went along. So I won these awards, and I put out more albums, and things really did start happening. So around this time, this was 2013 when I put out this last album called I Am Water. And we started hiring more tutors at the same time as well. And so this was when I really had to make a decision about how am I going to do both of these things well. I didn't want to do one thing well and the other one poorly. I didn't want to do both of them poorly. They both required quite a bit of time, quite a bit of patience and persistence, quite a bit of focus. So my goal was to be just as successful as I was as a musician, which I cared about a ton, as I was as an educator. So we hired a few more tutors, and I started taking this process just as seriously as I was the music situation. And we became kind of like a real company at this point. We had staff meetings. We had a Dropbox. It was super official. And we were tutoring up to around 100 students at a time throughout New York City while I was running around rapping and still kind of like performing in the underground scene of New York. So it was pretty exciting. And the idea that I was always trying to work on was balance. So balance is something that, of course, we can think about. And I think objectively, we all know that balance is important. But like what it actually means is kind of what I want to get down to. So we're going to talk about not just what balance is in a theoretical sense, but really how to apply it to our lives. So we're going to start by defining some of these terms, and we're going to see kind of how this might apply to the notion of being able to balance these two different goals and exploits. So the difference between a habit and just something that you know or do is really important for us to keep in mind. And we might not realize it, but we develop our habits pretty unintentionally, and our brains are doing this work without us really asking them to do it. Part of our brain that makes this happen is the basal ganglia. And the basal ganglia doesn't really have a bouncer sitting out in front of it being like, who's the good habit that can come in, who's the bad habit that shouldn't come in. Whatever we do repetitively is going to become a habit. And that doesn't only have to do with what we do, it also has to do with our thoughts. So my entire life, I was thinking of myself as a rapper. I was walking around New York City with headphones on, constantly rapping and interacting with people, not pretending to be a rapper, but like actually having the mindset of being one. What I didn't think of myself as was an educator. And yet my presentation was perhaps more that of an educator than of a rapper. And the people I interacted with, those kids I went to school with, all ended up in the realm of academia in one way or another, not in rap music. But I had to make my thinking coincide with my actions. So I often recognize that as long as I thought authentically, which was somebody who's interested in hip hop and rapping, and I thought authentically, which was somebody who was a capable educator and worked with kids and it went well, that my actions would start to reflect my thinking. And so I started to distinguish the difference between an action becoming a habit and an action just being something I did, and my thinking becoming a habit and thinking just something that happened on its own. So I was very intentional about my thoughts. And I started to recognize also the difference between information, knowledge, and wisdom. This was important for me as I moved along as well. So information isn't just stuff you have access to. If you can Google something, that's information. If you have something written down, that's information, but that's not knowing it. So I wanted to know myself as a rapper, and I wanted to know what it meant to be a successful communicator as an educator or as a musician. I didn't want to just have access to that information. I wanted to be able to know it. But then wisdom is kind of the upper echelon, right? I wanted to be wise as an educator. I wanted to be wise as a business owner. I wanted to be wise as an independent musician. I wanted to be wise kind of as a person. So what wisdom is when you take knowledge and you put it to use. So I knew a lot about educating because I'd been tutoring really over 1,000 students by the time I was like 30. And I've been rapping since I was like 7 or 8. But putting it to use properly, being able to say to myself, okay, so I know a lot, I've got a lot of reps, but if I'm putting it to use properly, then that's when I've achieved wisdom. And that was kind of my goal, was to be not just somebody who has access to information or who knows a lot of stuff, but really can kind of be wise. So this took a little bit of research to understand how to put a lot of these ideas to use properly. So this is where the executive functioning comes in. Executive functioning, you guys might have heard of this already, but it's essentially an opportunity for you to take a lot of different malleable features of your brain and connect them and make it cohesive. Because obviously our brains do lots of different things, and in order for us to function at a high level, and by high, I mean high for your own personal selves, we have to have one person kind of running the show at the top, who's kind of conducting the entire orchestra, and that's the executive, and that executive is helping us function. So these 4 things are kind of the tenets of executive functioning overall. So your thoughts, your actions, your emotions, and your ability to plan. So we've talked about thoughts and actions. There's a lot that goes into thinking in an efficient way and in a positive way. But really what we're aiming to do with our thoughts is be more than just going from the inside out. We want to go from the outside in at times as well, where we're still being able to kind of view our own thoughts with a sense of awareness. And a lot of what we're going to be talking about is going to be in regards to awareness. Our emotions are obviously pretty complicated. And when it comes to being able to balance your main career with a side project, things that you care about, both of those things, having your emotions be something that you can manage is obviously going to be beneficial. Now, I'm not advocating that we turn into robots and that we think, okay, so I have to be managing my emotions. I can't just feel my feelings. We want to be able to have access to both. Passion is supposed to be filled with feeling. But if we can't control our impulses, and if we can't control our ability to stay focused, and we're not really in control of the entire idea about caring, then we're not going to really be in control of much of our thoughts or our actions. So this is why awareness is so important. Without awareness, our feelings can kind of take over, and then we're just responding to our emotions. And without awareness, our thoughts can kind of take over. So the goal is to be able to have some impulse control and to focus on what it means for us to be paying attention in the moment, not just overall. And that's a way that our emotions can be a contributing factor to enhancing our executive function. The last feature is our ability to plan. So this is something we'll talk about quite a bit, but a lot of times as a tutor or running the company, parents will come to me and talk about my students, and they'll say, my kid has a problem, and the problem is time management, and their kid is 9. And I don't know why 9-year-olds are expected to be able to handle time management, but the parents are viewing it kind of through their own lens. And what they're not recognizing is that the ability to plan often isn't about a problem with time management. It's just not knowing how to plan. It's not understanding really what steps are necessary to get from the beginning of what you're trying to achieve to the goal actually being achieved. So we're going to kind of unpack these 4 ideas as we talk more about how executive functioning can help you balance the 2 worlds of a job and a passion project. So this is you or me or anybody on the right there bowing to an obstacle, an opponent. And what this is the beginning of any challenge. I like this image as an idea because it really reminds me that when you're beginning any type of a challenge, we want to respect the challenge, right? That's why we bow to an opponent like this. We don't want to view a challenge as something that's scary or something that we're better than. We don't want the obstacle to be easy, because then it's not really an obstacle. It's not really worth bowing to. The goal in a really fulfilling experience is for it to be challenging. Like at the end of a sports game, you say good game to the other teammates, not just because of how they played, but you're saying good game, meaning like you gave me a challenge and you pushed me to try my best. So it might seem kind of obvious that trying your best is a good idea, but when we check ourselves, and this goes back to the awareness concept, if we're not leaning into something as a challenge, we're not really taking it full on. So I was in New York City trying to be a rapper, and I was like, like a balding 25-year-old white Jewish guy who would get out of a tutoring session and then go to some like underground club, and it was sometimes pretty intimidating. But I loved that. I loved grabbing a microphone and seeing like a room full of people who just like did not believe at all. And they're like, prove to me that you can do this. And in my mind, I was kind of bowing to this challenge and saying, all right, well, I know I can rap. I've been rapping since I was a kid, and like, I'm going to do it right now. And it was my favorite thing to take their arms and have them become unfolded and have them get into it. And the same thing as a business owner. I'd be speaking with parents, and they would be looking at me when I was in my mid-20s, and they'd be like, how do you know what you're doing with these kids? And it was up to me to lean into that challenge. So if we view challenges as a negative thing, if we view something that's hard as a negative thing, we're in for more of a struggle in order for us to achieve our absolute best than we should be. Because a challenge is inevitable. All these things are challenges. So the goal is to be able to look at a challenge as a positive thing. I hear a lot of people tell me before I start something, they'll warn me. They'll say, it's not going to be easy. That's a warning that we throw around a lot in our society. We tell people, well, it's not going to be easy, as if that's a reason to not try something. It's not going to be easy. Like easy means requiring little to no effort. So if that's a reason to not do something, if we're going to say, okay, so it's not going to be easy, therefore I shouldn't do it, that means that the only things we're going to do are the things that require little to no effort. So that really obviously shouldn't be our goal. Our goal is to lean into these challenges and to view them as something that we can really appreciate and respect. A lot of the parents who I work with, they'll be very excited when the kid has achieved something really big, like getting into a new school. And I think that's super important, obviously. A lot of times parents, that's the main goal, is for kids to get into a new school. And the kid gets into a new school and they'll high five me like we're done. Or when I was rapping, if I booked a show that was like a really important gig, or as a company owner, when we get new clients, and that's a really good look for a company, for a business owner, obviously. I'm not high-fiving everybody just because we get new clients. I'm not really super excited just because I booked a gig. And when a parent tries to high-five me because their kid got into a new school, I want to tell everybody to slow down. This means that the work is just beginning. This is a new challenge now that, okay, you got into a new school, you want to do well in that new school. I booked a gig, I got to knock that gig out the park. We've got these new students, we want to do a good job with them. So I view a lot of these types of things as similar to being in the Olympics. If you qualify for the Olympics, it's really a big deal to qualify for the Olympics. But now you got to be in the Olympics. And so the real challenge isn't just about getting your foot settled onto step one. It's about formulating a plan to make sure that you can follow through and get to where you actually want to be, which probably isn't just walking into the opening ceremony of the Olympics. You don't want to be celebrating at the open ceremony of the Olympics. Like this guy here, he's confused. Down there in the front, he's celebrating at the opening ceremony as if he's won something, but he's not done yet. So the goal is to go through an entire journey. And we want to make sure that we're aiming to be more than just somebody who's happy to be there. All right, so let's look at this guy. That is half a person and half a bird. That's a strange image. So when it comes to this whole idea about being able to think about the journey as the goal, and then not only focusing on the endpoint, but really focusing on how we get there. I like to think about the story of the ugly duckling, which is what this kid is right now. So you are all probably familiar of the story of the ugly duckling. It's a weird story. The main idea from the ugly duckling that we probably remember is that there was like a duck who was ugly, and then he turned into a beautiful swan, and then everybody liked him. And that's the story of the ugly duckling. That's weird to me because if it was a duckling, how can a duck turn into a swan? Ducks can't turn into swans. Those are two different animals. And what are we teaching kids with this story? That if there's an ugly baby, we should be nice to it because it might turn into something beautiful later, and we might want it to like us. It's a strange concept. So the whole story of the ugly duckling, I think, really is attempting to encapsulate the idea that we should love everybody, but I really like to go a step further and have it start from who we are and recognize that if we're going to be viewed as ugly by the outside and have that matter, we're kind of missing out on the opportunity for ourselves to really trust what we know about ourselves. So when I stepped into like a rap cipher, I kind of felt like the ugly duckling, but I knew I was good. And so I recognized that I wasn't going to try to turn into a swan. I was already a swan. And it was the same thing when I was tutoring kids, and it was the same thing when I was trying to recruit new staff members and when I was trying to get more students. A lot of people kind of look at me and be like, you don't have your master's in education, and I didn't. You don't have a business degree, and I didn't. And I was kind of the ugly duckling of that world as well. And if you put me in the world of, okay, so who are the tutors who are also rappers, that world doesn't really exist. But I knew that I didn't have to become a good looking duck. I was already a swan, and it started from inside of me. So this is kind of like a self-helpy idea that you have to believe in yourself, obviously. But for the most part, when it comes to trying to do something really hard, balancing two different experiences, being able to have a career and also pursue a passion project, if you don't believe in it, if you don't recognize that you've been a swan the entire time, you're barely going to be able to make it happen, let alone make it happen as well as you possibly can. So the goal has to be for you to trust yourself and have the incentive and the belief come from you, not have external sources tell you, oh, well, you're beautiful because you're a swan. Look at this kid. He's half a person, half a duck. That's weird. Still beautiful, though. He's a swan the whole time. So we're going to be working from the inside out. That's the entire goal. And this is what I do with my students, and this is what I do with myself as a rapper as well. So with my students, like I said, a lot of times the focus is getting them into a new school, and that's the results on the outside. Or if they're just trying to enhance their grades, that's the results on the outside. And a lot of us with our careers, we're trying to make money so we have security and we can get things that we want. We want to have some sort of status. pursue these dreams. A lot of that's on the outside. Those are the results. That's the end point. I like to start with the inside, which is, why am I doing this? And why do I even really care? And why does it matter to me? And the more I can be connected to that question of why, the more likely I am to really be able to maximize my effort and to lean into these challenges. Doing things that are hard, like I was just talking about, isn't really all that natural for us. We should just be lying down and eating and sleeping and being with our friends and like not doing difficult things if we can. Doing things that are hard is kind of counterintuitive. But if we're going to try to achieve something, odds are it's going to require us to do something that's challenging. And the more we can connect to our own personal incentive from the inside, the better chance we have of being able to actually lean into it with as much vigor as possible. So this is an idea that I want to keep on focusing on, the notion of changing from the outside being the opposite mode. And if we're starting from the outside going in, we're going backwards. If we're starting from the finish line of what I want to achieve, we're going backwards. We have to start with, who am I? And why do I want this thing that I want? And the more we can articulate this, the more awareness we can have around this idea. And I really mean like articulating it to yourself, actually verbalizing why you want what you want, and not just stopping with a one-word answer, and not just accepting, okay, well, my society seems to emphasize the notion of financial success, or this is important because my religion says so, or this was a value that my mom had, and being like, so that's why I care about it. Well, why do you care about what those things care about? A lot of what we really end up depending on for motivation has to be answered from only us. And if we can't answer it, we're not going to try as hard as we possibly can. So the notion of leaning into these challenges with maximized effort has to start from us asking ourselves, not just what should we do, and not just how should we do it, but why. So a lot of times external pressure can end up really exacerbating somebody's abilities. And that's kind of what's happening in this image here. But the notion of this being sustainable is really important. And what I find is that when we put pressure on ourselves that connects to a personalized sense of incentive, it's sustainable because we're going to want it every day if it's something that really does matter to us. Whereas if we're putting it on ourselves based on somebody else's expectations or some sort of numerical, quantifiable concept, if we're comparing ourselves to somebody else, these are ideas that are not sustainable. So external pressure, I don't view as a great sense of incentive. When I was rapping, I wasn't trying to be like, all right, I want to like get on the cover of this magazine or make this amount of money. I liked it. I loved doing it. It was a personal exploration for myself that I really just wanted to be able to achieve. And I had very specific goals. My goals as a rapper, I wanted to be able to be on stage and have that experience. You know, you ever been to a concert and the band plays just like the first note of a song and the crowd goes crazy because that's all they need to hear is the first note of this song that they love. And then the band's playing that song and obviously everybody's singing along. That's what I wanted to experience as a performer, as a musician, specifically as a rapper. I wanted to have that moment where I was on stage and the first note of my song comes on and the crowd goes nuts. And then I'm rapping and everybody's singing along. That was my goal. And that happened. And I didn't know if that was going to happen, but like that's all I wanted. Because that meant that I was communicating on a level that people were actually really interacting with. And it wasn't about somebody else validating it. It was really about me being able to make that happen. So here we have this kid being blown up by external pressures. And of course, after a while, if you blow up the balloon too much, it's going to get overflow with air and not be able to be tied up and flop around. And that's not what we want. All right, so then leaning into learning is another important concept here. And this is a kind of goofy image where I'm taking the characters from The Wizard of Oz and using them as little models for how we can lean into learning. So the idea of learning is obviously important to me as an educator running a tutoring company. But in terms of being somebody who is trying this new idea of balancing a passion project with a career, you're going to be learning. And for kids, learning makes a lot of sense because they don't know anything. And there is an innate interest in building themselves up as these little monsters who can survive the world, and they need to learn. When we're adults, we kind of don't want to learn because learning means admitting that you don't know something. That's the first step of learning, is being like, I'm bad at this. And then you're probably not going to go from I'm bad at this to I'm great at this It's going to go from I'm bad at this to I'm only kind of bad at this. And then to, oh, I'm only a little bit bad at this. And then like, I'm reasonably neutral at this after a while. So the notion of being able to lean into and accept this kind of frailty that we all have of not knowing something, that's the first step of learning. And it's going to require these three different features. So the heart is obviously you having this incentive we were talking about before, about caring, about knowing why you want to go down this path. The courage is the leaning into the fearful features of not knowing, which are obviously the first steps of learning something. And then the brains, so that might seem kind of obvious when it comes to learning, but we need to know how to learn. And learning how to learn is an important feature here as well. A lot of my students, they think that as long as they study for 11 hours the day before a test, that's going to be good. Clearly, there's a way to overdo it and to work out hard instead of working out smart. So the notion of doing what you know will put you in a position to acquire the new understanding that you need. It's more than just a large number of hours. A lot of times it's going to be the right way for you. So these three elements, I think, were chosen in Wizard of Oz for a reason. Dorothy was trying to get home, and home, I think, is the ultimate sense of safety and connection to yourself. And these three ideas, heart, courage, and brains, I think it makes sense for them to connect to allow us to feel that safe and that aware of ourselves. So Carl Jung, he has this idea that I think is an important one that ties up a lot of what I've been talking about already. This notion of what you want to find will be found where you least want to look. So yikes, Carl, that's annoying to hear. I don't like that. I don't want to have to look in the place that I least want to look in order to find what I most want to find. But I think this does hold true, and this connects to the idea of effort that I was talking about earlier, that in order for us to really achieve this challenging concept, it's going to require us doing things that are a little bit icky and things that don't really feel great in the moment. And we all obviously understand this idea about investing, investing into our future selves. So when we're in the gym and we're lifting weights or we're running on a treadmill and it's mildly to very much so horrendous, we're investing in it having some sort of outcome that we like, right? And so the idea of us being able to always lean into this unpleasant present in order to build for the future that we're trying to acquire, that has to be something that we remind ourselves of pretty often, if not every day, maybe all the time, that in the moment, even if it feels like I should be leaning away from this, we're there for a reason. And we're gonna really, I think, be much more enhanced if we lean into these things that we recognize are challenges. So this brings me to this idea of the snowballing domino effect of badness. And this is something I see with students, I see this with employees, and I think when it comes to trying to be an adult who's doing something that's pretty challenging, this is a good thing to keep in mind. So there have been many studies that connect to the idea of self-esteem to planning. And what we found, and what scientists who are much smarter than I am have found, is that there is a cycle here, that people who have low self-esteem are less likely to make plans. They don't believe in their ability to make a plan. Just making the first step doesn't feel like something that they are inclined to do. And they're gonna have an aversion to making plans. They're just gonna hope that the first thing they do will work. People with low self-esteem are more interested in immediate pleasure. So long-term gratification doesn't really appeal to them, largely because they don't believe that it's even possible for them to acquire this. So a low sense of self-esteem makes people less inclined to try to achieve long-term happiness, which makes them have an aversion to making plans. So then they don't make a plan. And when we don't make a plan, things aren't usually going to work out that well. So you have bad results, and then bad results leads to more low self-esteem. And it builds this cycle. It's unfortunate. And I see this with lots of students. So the goal isn't to just push the self-esteem button. I wish there was a self-esteem button, but this is true for adults as well. Our self-esteem is often the result of our actions, and the actions are often the results of our mindset. So I think our mindset can start with choosing to do things, and making plans is a choice we can make, even if they're scary, and even if we feel not inclined to do it, we can still choose to try to make a plan. And then the whole domino effect shifts. over to the snowballing domino effect of goodness. So this is true as well. When you have high self-esteem, you're more inclined to make a plan. And when you're more inclined to make a plan, you're more likely to succeed and have good results. And then you're more likely to increase your self-esteem, and it grows. So the idea of being able to make plans, to be inclined to make a plan, to aim to make a plan, it's all necessary. And when it comes to making plans, there's a lot of different ways that people view this. For instance, if you were going to plan to do a jumping jack, let's say you wanted to do the perfect jumping jack, like the ideal jumping jack. And I was going to ask you, what's the first step of doing a jumping jack? Most people would say, jump, right? That's the first step of doing a jumping jack, is you jump. Well, not necessarily. I feel like that's starting at the finish line there, because you're already doing the jumping jack. That's the first thing. I think the first thing is find out how to do a jumping jack. If you're trying to do a proper jumping jack, learning how to do one is step one. Planning when to do it, finding the right time to do it, finding the right place to do it. If I'm just going to do a jumping jack in the middle of a crowded subway, it doesn't matter if I know how to do it or not, I'm not going to be all that successful at it. And these are elements that seem kind of obvious, but a lot of people, when they're making some sort of plan, they don't take time and space into account. They don't take the notion of doing research and finding the proper protocol into account. They just think of starting it. My students, when I ask them what's the right way to plan to write a paper, what's the first step? Start the paper, write the intro. No, we have to make sure we understand the question. We have to make sure we have the time that's allotted for it, understand exactly where you're going to do it. There's a lot of different steps that go into planning. So planning properly is vital. And so is effort. So at this point, we have this little idea of this dude who's pushing, I guess, a big boulder around a track. And this person is achieving their goal, but they're just going in circles. And this is an idea that relates to effort pretty specifically. So here we have a different person who is pushing this same boulder up a hill. For what reason, I don't know. And then he gets there and the boulder disappears and his effort level is 100%. So this concept relates to the notion of effort being more significant than results. And that might seem a little bit backwards, but I think that for most people, what they'll find is that if they put forth, let's say 70% effort, and then they achieve what they wanted to achieve, that seems like a great thing. It's a very Americanized idea, I think, actually, that if you can achieve results without giving 100% effort, that's like you're winning something extra. But really what you're doing is you're teaching your brain that maximum effort isn't necessary, and then you're less inclined to use maximum effort when it actually might be necessary. And we all know that there are many times when maximum effort actually is necessary, and we want to be able to access it. But if we're teaching our brains that we don't need it, we're less likely to access it. Whereas if we employ 100% effort every single time, whether the results are 70%, 80%, 90%, or 100%, when we're doing this, we're achieving something every single time. We're building our brain's ability to rely on effort as the incentive. And then we're giving ourselves a chance to recognize that effort is worth accessing. And our brain is going to actually react to this. So you'll be able to tap into 100% effort much more easily when you need it. And that's going to be actually far more useful than being able to hope that you'll be able to achieve what you need to achieve with less effort. So I talked to a lot of my students, a lot of their parents, about the notion of what a student's actual job is. And their job isn't to get straight A's, their job is to give 100% effort. And I feel the same way when it comes to trying to do something challenging as an adult, like balancing your career with a side hustle. It should be about trying your hardest. And this was what I used to always say when I was rapping. Like I would put together album release parties, or I put together little, do-it-yourself tours or music videos. And I was doing this on my own. And, I had a bit of a budget. I was using tutoring money to support my rap career. And I had, a bit of a fan base. So I knew that people were going to come to these shows and people were going to watch these videos and buy these albums. But I didn't totally know that it was going to go well, but I knew that I was going to try my best. And that was the most important thing to me. So when it comes to doing a side project, a passion project, and balancing it with your career, I would always advise to lean into not necessarily trying to do it perfectly, but definitely doing it to the best of your ability. And as long as you're doing that, that's your job. a lot of times in life, even if you do things quote unquote the right way, the result won't be the right result. We can't usually control what happens in our lives. We don't really have much control over that at all. What we have control over is our response to what happens in our lives. So our ability to live isn't what our job is. Our duty isn't to make sure that goes well. Our duty is to be on top of our ability to have a good response. That's why it's called responsibility. It's not actually why it's called responsibility, but it's a good little trick to remind yourself that your ability to control your life isn't supposed to be there, but your ability to control your response to life and the effort that you put forth when there's challenges is what you should be leaning into. So now we come to this idea about metacognition. And this is connected to the notion of awareness I was talking about earlier. This goes all the way back to one of the first tenets of executive functioning, which is thinking. So thinking is kind of weird. It's kind of like an action, but it also kind of happens automatically. You'll have plenty of thoughts that you didn't mean to think, but you can also actively think about something. But metacognition is actually kind of like a secret bonus ability that we have when we're thinking about thinking, specifically thinking about how we think and using metacognition as a tool to help you achieve awareness and mindfulness. So awareness and mindfulness are two really powerful tools that give us the ability to make good decisions. It increases our processing speed. It allows us to not be a slave to our impulses. And we can therefore kind of turn what we think of as being instinctive reactions, which usually aren't the best moves in life, these knee-jerk reactions we have, to becoming actually cognitive thoughts and choices that we make. So practicing metacognition is a really important concept. The more metacognition that you employ throughout your day, and I don't just mean once in a while, if we're stopping and asking ourselves, why am I thinking about this? Where did this thought come from? And am I thinking to make a choice before actively doing something? We're building this muscle. And so being more metacognitive allows us to be more aware and mindful in general. And this would give us a kind of an extra boost when it comes to leaning into challenges and increasing our capacity for overcoming obstacles and for leaning into what we really are trying to achieve, no matter how hard it might be. So this is another idea when it comes to making decisions, the notion of going towards what you love instead of going away from what you fear. A lot of times when we make choices, we'll think to ourselves, well, which option kind of seems the least scary? And we'll choose that. And that isn't always going to lead us towards achieving what we want to achieve. Because running away from something that's upsetting, well, who knows where we're going? All we know is what we're getting away from. And we could end up anywhere. But if we go towards what we love, we're much more likely to get to where we're trying to go. So when it comes to trying to balance these two different worlds of a full-time job and a passion project, as long as you're aware of every minute choice being based on, okay, so am I choosing the thing that I like, or am I just trying to get away from the thing that's kind of upsetting? Having that awareness will most likely lead you towards making the choices that you'll reflect upon and be like, I actually wanted that to happen. As opposed to like, well, at least I got away from the scariest thing, but I ended up somewhere else I didn't want to be either. So we don't want that. And leaning into the challenge is a really important idea. So this is a motto of mine that I've been running with since I was a kid, this idea of say yes. I like palindromes, so I invented this one. So say yes is an idea that I kind of forced myself to really take control of when I started rapping and when I started running this tutoring company. For the most part, when you're presented with options of should you do this thing or should you not do this thing, most of the time saying yes is the better idea. If you're put in a position that you feel like, should I put myself in this potentially compromising position, you'll probably be okay. If it seems like physically dangerous or it's like obviously not conducive to your prolonged survival, you'll probably recognize that and then not do it. But what I found for the most part, reminding yourself that if you're going to look back on your life and say to yourself, do I regret not trying this thing, or do I regret trying this thing and it didn't go well? You'll probably regret the not trying more. So let's be aware of that. And let's not put ourselves in this position where we're going to regret that. And let's lean into doing these things that are somewhat challenging. One of these things that's challenging is in regard to the perspective that we view ourselves as throughout life. So this is a little concept about the way that a lot of us view ourselves in life as the protagonist, as the main character in a story, which makes sense because we view the world through our eyes, and this is kind of the camera that's recording the movie that we're watching as our life story. And then when we leave a room, the camera goes with us. So it's understandable to think that other people who are still in the room now aren't really in the story. So they're just kind of featured players. And we kind of view everybody out there as featured players and we're the main story. But it obviously isn't the case. Obviously, everybody's kind of their own protagonist. And so the more that we kind of view everybody as being equally important, obviously the notion of being empathetic, the more likely we are to be able to build really a community experience in whatever it is we're trying to do. And we as social creatures are going to benefit from this. The reason that being social is something that we're naturally inclined to do is because we as a species evolutionarily have benefited from cooperation and from interaction and from being part of a group. So we don't want to be conformists and we don't want to just do things because everybody else is doing it, but we do want to be able to interact with others and view them with as much care and interest and compassion as we do ourselves. So if we view ourselves as the main character of a story, we're looking at life only as ourselves as a protagonist. So the goal should be to view everybody as a protagonist and be more empathetic. And this is going to be very helpful for us to be able to achieve success. So this also ties into the notion of fit. Being fit means being healthy. And fitting in means being part of a whole, I guess. And it's weird to think of those two ideas as being connected, even though it's the same word. But they are connected for the exact reason I was just discussing. The idea that if you fit into a whole, if you're a part of a community and part of a society, you're more likely to survive. And the notion of survival in 2019 probably isn't something that you guys think about every day. I hope I survive. But we as a species have that running through us, this fight for survival. So the more we are leaning into fitting in to a group and being able to be viewed as a favorable member of a community, the more likely we are to be fit and be healthy and survive. So this is a notion of mistaking problems for symptoms. A lot of times when it comes to leaning into a challenge, such as being able to balance these two worlds of a full-time job and a side passion project, you'll come up against problems that are actually symptoms. So it's important to allow yourself to recognize that very often symptoms do appear to be problems and they're actually symptoms. So we don't want to think, oh no, I'm bad at public speaking, that's a problem. Might feel like a problem, but you're probably actually experiencing anxiety, and anxiety is the problem. And so addressing public speaking on its own isn't the best idea. We want to get to the root of it, and the root might be anxiety. So a lot of times when it comes to trying to balance a passion project with a full-time career, feeling connected is often the problem, but we're going to mistake that for something else. So this idea of feeling connected is really at the heart of how I view being able to maximize our abilities as adults and as people. So I want to kind of imagine we have a batter in the batter's box. And this batter, let's say, has learned a lot about executive function. And this batter has gone through a lot of what I was discussing. And this batter is capable of completing necessary actions. They're using metacognition. They might even meditate. They keep a journal. They're being self-aware. This is great. This is a big deal for that batter. So this batter is cognitively flexible and is staying organized and is self-monitoring, right? So good job, batter. And now the batter is wearing a helmet. So that's awesome, because this batter can not only do necessary actions, but can also use necessary strategies, such as the metacognition, and is aware of time and knows how to ask for help. So this is a batter who's pretty capable, doing a good job. They're in the batter's box, wearing a helmet, ready to rock. But what they were missing, obviously, is a tool to make contact. And that tool is meaning. Meaning is the bat. Finding meaning in what you're doing, being aware of why that meaning matters to you, is the tool that we're going to be able to use to connect and to hit the ball and to be able to be a potent batter with ability in the batter's box, ready to be able to be engaged in a maximum way, to use mindful incentive, and to apply sustained effort. So meaning is what I always leaned on when I was trying to balance these two different worlds, and asking myself, why is this important? And searching myself for an articulated sense of purpose was always my goal. So adding meaning to executive functioning, I found to be the missing piece. So at this point, I'm now a retired rapper. I'm very comfortable saying that at age 37. My tutoring company, we now have, I think, 22 staff members in New York City doing our thing. And we are the Hartman Tutoring Company, owned and run by a retired rapper. So for the most part, when it comes to making any of this happen, the idea of achieving sustained effort often connects to meaning and purpose from my perspective through the use of executive function. I appreciate you guys hanging out and watching, and thanks very much. And I'm now happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Jesse. We have a couple of questions rolling in. This is also a great time to remind everyone, for any questions that you have throughout the talk, go ahead and submit those. We've got a couple of minutes. I'm going to try to get to as many questions as possible. The first one just came in, and this is the question of how do you deal with alternating schedules and restricted free time, for example, a physician schedule, and successfully pursue your passion project without adding to your potential for burnout?
Right, that's a great question. So the main idea is to really think ahead. And the more planning you can do ahead, the easier that any of this scheduling stuff is going to be. So essentially mapping out exactly what steps you're planning to take, knowing exactly how much time each step takes, knowing what time restrictions there might be for those steps. For instance, if there's only certain things you can do in the morning or on a weekday or on a weekend, and then making a long-term plan with a calendar and getting down and dirty with a bunch of materials, treating it like you used to treat like a 9th grade history paper, and breaking it down into pieces and making sure that you know exactly when you're going to do which element. If you write it all out and you have every step down, like I was talking about with the jumping jacks, if you know exactly what each piece is and you know how long it'll take you and when you're going to do it, you have a much better chance of actually achieving it. So I would make 6-month plans for myself when it came to music and tutoring, and make sure I knew, okay, shooting the video is going to take this much time and this much money. I need to do these steps to get there. And if I want the release date, I would start at the end. Whatever the release date was, I was going to work backwards. So if you know that you have an end date in mind for something, work your way backwards and pick out the points that you know you need to hit along the way, so you know when you can start to get done in a reasonable time. It's all about planning and being strategic with your timing. And obviously there are going to be some moments when these worlds will clash and you won't have a chance to kind of do both. And then you just got to accept that it's going to be one or the other, and that not everything can happen at the same time. And acceptance is a big part of this as well. And allowing yourself to recognize that we all have limits, and that not everything's going to get done on the first try. So acceptance of limitations, but ideally planning as much as you can is kind of the balance that you'd be going for.
Great, thanks, Jesse. We have another question. You've talked a lot about mindfulness. Do you recommend meditation for your students? And if so, how young is too young? Or at what age is the best age to start? And do you have any recommended resources like websites or books that you could share with us?
Awesome question. So mindfulness is a word that has become linked directly with meditation over the last bunch of decades. And that makes a lot of sense. Meditation is a great tool. It's a great practice. It shouldn't be the only thing we think of when it comes to mindfulness, just because a lot of people don't take to meditation all that well. So journaling is something I would recommend for people who might not lean into meditation. Even just talking into a tape recorder, or speaking into like your phone, whatever it might be, just to get your thoughts out can be a form of mindfulness as well. But meditation is something that I do advocate for my students, and I don't really believe there is a too young. I have 6 or 7-year-olds who will work through, I wouldn't necessarily call it meditation, we'll work through breathing exercises, and we'll have them just focus on their breath and to sit still. And then my older students will get into a little bit more mantra work that is still basically just breathing exercises. But the idea being that a lot of people think that meditation means to think deeply, and it's actually the opposite of that. The goal is to think about thinking by focusing on only one solitary concept, usually just your breath. There's a great, I think there's an app now that Sam Harris has about meditation and mindfulness that I would definitely recommend. He guides people, users of all ages, through different mindfulness exercises and meditation exercises. So I would recommend getting his app, Sam Harris, Harris, quite helpful.
Great, thanks so much, Jesse. We're just about at time. Thank you to everyone who joined. This recording will be sent in about 20 minutes once it's downloaded. Thank you to Jesse. We're going to include his contact information as well. And please come back and join us for more Emory Alumni Association Professional Career Development webinars. We'll be sharing 20 new webinars this fall and look forward to having you join those when you are able. Thanks a lot, Jesse, and everybody have a great day.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.